There was a time when you could disappear into something, a book, a project, a skill you wanted to master. Hours would pass, and you wouldn't even notice. You weren't forcing yourself to focus. You weren't fighting distractions. You were simply absorbed. But for many people, that version of themselves feels very far away now. Today, you sit down to work, and within minutes, your attention starts drifting. A notification, another tab, a quick check of your phone, and suddenly, the focus is gone. And the worst part is, the work was never the problem. You wanted to do it. You planned to do it. You told yourself this time would be different, but your mind could not stay there long enough to enter depth. And slowly, you begin questioning yourself, wondering what happened to the person you used to be. Most people believe they have lost their discipline, that they need more willpower, more motivation, more productivity systems. But what if none of that is true? What if you haven't lost your ability to focus? You've lost the conditions that make focus possible. Because flow is not a gift. It is not talent, and it is not luck. Flow is what remains when distraction finally disappears. And today, you are going to learn why deep focus feels so difficult in the modern world, and the exact protocol that brings it back. Welcome back to Elite Flow State. This is the Void Protocol Extended. Most people think focus is something they do. In reality, focus is something that happens when the conditions are right. Think about the moments when you felt completely immersed in something. Reading, building, creating, learning. You were not forcing concentration. You were not constantly pulling your attention back. The focus felt natural. And that is what many people fail to understand. Deep focus was never supposed to feel difficult. It only feels difficult inside an environment that constantly trains distraction. Modern life has normalized interruption. A message arrives, a notification appears, a new recommendation is waiting, and each interruption seems harmless on its own. Just a few seconds, just a quick check, just one glance. But attention does not work the way most people think. Every interruption leaves a trace. A fragment of your mind remains attached to what just captured it. This is why you can sit in front of your work, while part of your attention is still somewhere else. Still inside a conversation, still inside a video, still inside a notification you checked 20 minutes ago. This is why you can open your laptop with a serious intention. You genuinely want to work. You genuinely want to create. And yet 20 minutes later, you have consumed information without producing a single meaningful thing. And when the day ends, you feel exhausted. Not because you created too much, but because your attention was pulled in 100 different directions. Not because you are lazy, not because you lack discipline, but because your attention never fully arrived. And the more often this happens, the harder it becomes to enter depth. Not because you became less intelligent, not because you became less capable, but because depth requires continuity. A river cannot become powerful if it is constantly divided into smaller streams, and attention works the same way. This is why so many people feel busy all day, yet accomplish very little that feels meaningful. Their attention is moving constantly, but it is never staying anywhere long enough to become powerful. And eventually, people begin blaming themselves. They call it procrastination, lack of discipline, lack of motivation. But what if the problem started much earlier? What if the real problem is that your nervous system has been trained to expect interruption? Because if distraction becomes the default environment, focus begins feeling unnatural. And if fragmentation feels normal, depth will always feel like resistance, which raises a far more important question. If modern life has trained your mind to expect interruption, how do you train it to enter depth again? Most people believe flow begins when concentration appears. It doesn't. Flow begins the moment you stop leaving, because the real problem is not that your attention is weak. The real problem is that part of you is always somewhere else. The Void Protocol was never designed to increase productivity. It was designed to bring you back. Gate 1, leave the noise. Before you can arrive anywhere, you must stop traveling in every direction. Put the phone away, close the unnecessary tabs, remove the inputs competing for your attention, then sit still for 3 minutes, not to become productive, to become present. Gate 2. Choose the place. Most people never arrive because they never choose where to arrive. They sit down with 10 priorities, 10 objectives, 10 unfinished loops, and attention fractures before the work even begins. Choose one place for your attention to rest, one meaningful thing, one unfinished conversation with reality, one place to remain, because attention becomes powerful when it finally stops searching for somewhere else to go. Gate 3. Stay long enough. This is where depth begins. Not when you start, when you stop leaving. Most people abandon the moment. Seconds before immersion arrives, they check something, refresh something, respond to something, and the doorway closes again. Stay. Just a little longer than feels comfortable, long enough for the mind to stop searching, long enough for attention to settle, long enough for the work to become the only thing that exists. And then something changes. The resistance weakens, the noise fades, the sense of effort begins dissolving. You are no longer trying to focus. You are no longer forcing productivity. You are simply here, and that is the threshold most people never cross, not because it is difficult, but because modern life trained them to leave before depth arrives. And once you finally stop leaving, the work begins to change its relationship with you. It no longer feels like something you must push. It begins to pull you. Most people believe flow begins when concentration appears. It doesn't. Flow begins the moment you stop leaving, because the real problem is not that your attention is weak. The real problem is that part of you is always somewhere else. The Void Protocol was never designed to increase productivity. It was designed to bring you back. Gate 1. Leave the noise. Before you can arrive anywhere, you must stop traveling in every direction. Put the phone away, close the unnecessary tabs, remove the inputs competing for your attention, then sit still for 3 minutes, not to become productive, to become present. Gate 2. Choose the place. Most people never arrive because they never choose where to arrive. They sit down with 10 priorities, 10 objectives, 10 unfinished loops, and attention fractures before the work even begins. Choose one place for your attention to rest, one meaningful thing, one unfinished conversation with reality, one place to remain, because attention becomes powerful when it finally stops searching for somewhere else to go. Gate 3. Stay long enough. This is where depth begins. Not when you start, when you stop leaving. Most people abandon the moment. Seconds before immersion arrives, they check something, refresh something, respond to something, and the doorway closes again. Stay. Just a little longer than feels comfortable, long enough for the mind to stop searching, long enough for attention to settle, long enough for the work to become the only thing that exists. And then something changes. The resistance weakens, the noise fades, the sense of effort begins dissolving. You are no longer trying to focus. You are no longer forcing productivity. You are simply here, and that is the threshold most people never cross, not because it is difficult, but because modern life trained them to leave before depth arrives. And once you finally stop leaving, the work begins to change its relationship with you. It no longer feels like something you must push. It begins to pull you. Something unusual happens. When attention finally stops searching, the work begins changing. At first, nothing feels different. You are still sitting in the same chair, still looking at the same page, still working on the same task. But somewhere beneath the surface, a shift begins. The urge to check disappears. The urge to leave weakens. The constant negotiation inside your mind begins growing quiet. And for the first time in a long time, your attention stops splitting itself between different worlds. There is only the work, and the next step, and the next. Time begins behaving differently. Minutes stop feeling heavy. Hours stop feeling long. The clock continues moving. but your awareness of it begins fading. This is why flow feels so rare, not because it is complicated, but because modern life rarely allows us to stay anywhere long enough for it to emerge. Most people spend their lives chasing stimulation. Very few discover the deeper reward hiding underneath it, the reward of complete absorption, the reward of being fully engaged with reality, the reward of no longer needing to escape the present moment. Flow is not an escape from reality. Flow is the moment reality becomes interesting again, and once you experience that state again, something becomes impossible to ignore. The distractions that once felt irresistible begin losing their power, not because you became stronger, but because you finally remembered what depth feels like. And once depth returns, the question is no longer how to enter flow. The question becomes, how do you protect it? Because the world will try to pull you out the moment you finally arrive. Most people believe the difficult part is entering flow. It isn't. The difficult part is staying there, because the modern world is not designed to protect depth. It is designed to interrupt it. The moment attention becomes stable, something immediately tries to claim it. A message, a notification, an update, a request, 100 tiny invitations to leave the present moment. And most of them appear harmless. They only ask for a few seconds, just one glance, just one check, just one response. But depth is fragile, not because it is weak, because it takes time to build. A single interruption may only last 10 seconds, but the return journey can take much longer. This is why one notification can destroy an entire hour, not because the message was important, but because it broke the continuity. Your mind was finally building. This is why protecting attention is not about discipline. It is about boundaries. Every meaningful thing in life requires protection. A garden requires a fence. A home requires walls. A fire requires shelter from the wind. And deep work is no different. Most people treat attention as something public, something available to anyone, at any moment. And then they wonder why depth never stays. But attention is not public property. And yet most people give it away all day long, to feeds, to notifications, to demands they never consciously chose, until they can no longer remember what it feels like to belong fully to themselves. Every time you protect it, you are making a decision. You're deciding that the thing in front of you matters more than the distraction trying to replace it. And that decision changes something deeper than productivity. It changes identity, because every time you remain present, when the world asks you to leave, you strengthen a different version of yourself. The version that builds, the version that creates, the version that stays. And eventually, protecting your attention stops feeling like a technique. It becomes a way of living, because the people who create extraordinary things are rarely the people with the most talent. They are often the people who learned how to remain when everyone else keeps leaving. But sovereignty is not built in one perfect session. It is built by the person you become every time you choose to stay. And that is where true sovereignty begins. Perhaps the greatest misunderstanding about focus is the belief that it is something you must constantly acquire, as if attention were a resource that exists somewhere outside yourself, something to chase, something to unlock, something to earn. But after everything we have explored, a different possibility begins to emerge. What if flow was never something you lost? What if it was simply something you stopped protecting because there was a time when your attention belonged to you, before every moment became an opportunity for interruption, before silence became uncomfortable, before distraction became the default setting of modern life? And yet beneath all of that noise, the capacity for depth never disappeared. It waited, quietly, patiently, waiting for you to return. That is why the void protocol matters. Not because it helps you become more productive, not because it helps you complete more tasks, but because it helps you recover something far more valuable. Your ability to remain with a thought, to remain with meaningful work, to remain with your own life, because every meaningful thing you hope to build will ultimately depend on that ability, not talent, not information, not even motivation, the ability to stay. And perhaps that is the real challenge of modern life, not learning how to move faster, but learning how to remain long enough for depth to emerge. Flow is not the destination. It is proof that your attention has returned home. The world will continue competing for your attention. That will not change. The notifications will continue. The feeds will continue. The noise will continue. But not everything that asks for your attention deserves access to it. Protect your attention, protect your depth, and most importantly, protect the person you become when you choose to stay, because that person is capable of building a very different future. And if your mind still feels tired, even after rest, then the problem may be deeper than focus. It may begin in the nervous system itself. That is where our next conversation begins. Until then, stay deeply human.